What would you do if the man you were about to marry turned out to be sleeping with over 40 women behind your back? What if you found out after buying the ring, after introducing him to your family, and after giving him everything? Well, she did what every scorned woman dreams of. She took him down, one text at a time. When I tell you it felt like a fairy tale, I mean it. We weren't just in love, we were planning forever. Our families had met, holidays were shared, and just a few months ago he looked me in the eye and said, "We're getting married this year." It was Christmas Eve when he told my parents. His eyes sparkled, my mom cried, and he held my hand like I was the center of his universe. I had no idea that the man sitting beside me was a well-practiced illusionist, every word rehearsed. Every smile part of a long con. March came. That's when he took me ring shopping. I remember trying on bands under soft store lighting, looking at myself in the mirror thinking, this is it. I found my person. He said all the right things. He watched me twirl with excitement. And I could swear he looked at me like he truly saw forever in my eyes. And maybe in that moment he believed it too. Or maybe he just wanted to keep the lie alive a little longer. We lived together for 2 years. Shared groceries, inside jokes, Netflix passwords, and dreams. I paid more of the rent because his acting career was still finding its footing. He promised me that as soon as things picked up, he'd take care of me. I didn't mind. I loved him. Love makes you generous. Naive, blind. The truth? I thought we were the happiest we'd ever been. No fights, no distance. Just future plans and lazy Sunday mornings. But I didn't know I was falling in love with a ghost, a man who could be anything you wanted as long as it got him what he needed. Behind my back, the betrayal had already begun. Right before Christmas, the same week he told my parents we were getting engaged, he got permission from a married man to sleep with his wife. Let that sink in. While I was sipping cocoa with his mom and talking about wedding venues, he was laying the groundwork for a secret threesome. And it didn't stop there. Apparently, he kept seeing the wife after that. Emotional affair, regular contact. And I am not sure what's worse, knowing he did it or realizing that the man I trusted with my body, my home, my future had already decided I was disposable. But back then I didn't know any of this. Not yet. All I knew was that I felt loved. He made me feel chosen. When he'd brush the hair out of my face, or grab my hand under the table at dinner, or text me midday with, "Just thinking about you," I thought it was real. My guard was down, completely. I'd cooked for him, nursed him when he was sick, cried with him over failed auditions. I even helped him set up a better portfolio. He used my contacts, my time, my money, all while pretending we were building something together. But it turns out I wasn't his partner. I was just a well-decorated waiting room. What gets me the most is how easy he made it all look. The lies, the affection, the little performances. I look back now and wonder, were those moments ever real? Or were they rehearsals for whatever scene he was playing next? Because looking back, the signs were there. The way he always kept his phone face down, the vague excuses. The way he suddenly needed me time after a year of clinging to me like a lifeline. But I ignored them because I wanted to believe in us. Because he made me believe we were solid, and so I poured into him. My energy, my trust, my plans, all of it. He was the dream and I was too in love to see that I was just his backup plan. But the scariest part? If he slipped up, if I hadn't looked a little too closely at the wrong time, I might have married him. I might have stood in a white dress beside someone who was juggling dozens of women behind my back. The betrayal didn't start when I found out. It started long before. It started the moment he decided he could lie to my face while mapping out hookups behind my back. The moment he kissed me after cheating. The moment he said, "I love you," with her lipstick still on his collar. But at the time, all I saw was love. That's why this part hurts the most. Because the perfect lie was my happy place. It was the fantasy I built my life on. And it was already crumbling before I even saw the first crack. And when that crack finally showed, the whole damn thing shattered. Everything in my life was going according to plan until it wasn't. I'm not even talking about a big event. Some explosive moment where everything falls apart in an instant. No, it was a tiny crack that appeared when I almost didn't notice. It was a random Wednesday. He was acting distant, but I chalked it up to him being stressed over auditions. We'd had a normal morning. He kissed me goodbye before heading out, saying he'd be back late to help me with the dinner I'd planned. A typical day. Except, a week later, that typical day would be the last I could ever see clearly. It started innocently. I got a call from a mutual friend of ours who worked at a bar downtown. She asked if I knew where my boyfriend had been last Thursday, the night I thought he was at a late rehearsal. Apparently, he'd been out there drinking until last call with someone else. I thought he was with you, she said, sounding confused. I could hear the uncertainty in her voice, and it made me uneasy. My gut twisted. My first thought was to brush it off. Maybe he was out with someone from the acting world. Maybe he just needed a break, but deep down something felt off, so I called him. He picked up almost immediately, voice unusually calm for someone who'd been drinking. He'd been with a friend from the agency, he said, just blowing off some steam. I felt the tension in my chest when he didn't offer any real details about what they'd been doing. He quickly moved the conversation along, talking about his plans for tomorrow, like he didn't even realize I could sense the shift. Then came the first clue. He didn't mention his phone once. Now, I wasn't the type to snoop. In fact, I never had to. He and I were transparent with each other, or so I thought. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I needed answers. He never hid his phone from me before, but that night when I casually mentioned his texts, he shut down immediately. Why do you need to look at my phone? He snapped. That wasn't like him. I tried to laugh it off, but the tightness in his voice felt like a noose around my neck. For the next few days, things were different. I couldn't place it. He wasn't necessarily cold, but there was a wall I hadn't noticed before. Conversations became forced, laughter felt fake, and there were moments when his gaze would wander, like he was thinking about something else entirely. Something I wasn't a part of. I found myself trying harder than ever to fill the silence, to make him smile, to get back to what we had. But it was like trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. The more I tried, the further he seemed to slip away. I wanted to believe it was just a phase. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But deep down I knew. My heart was already picking up on the lies before my mind could catch up. And then came the moment I'll never forget. It was a week after the bar incident. He'd been distant for days, but we were supposed to have a night in, watching movies and eating junk food like we always did. Instead, as I got ready, he came out of the bathroom looking off. His hair was a mess, his shirt wrinkled. It wasn't that he looked bad, he just didn't look like himself. Something was different. When I asked him if everything was okay, he brushed me off with a quick, "Yeah, just tired. You know how it is?" But I didn't know how it was. And I wasn't buying it. Later that night, after we'd settled in and I'd opened my glass of wine, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. His phone was sitting face up on the table. Normally, he never left his phone unattended. He was so protective of it, like it was a lifeline he couldn't let go of. But tonight,
he just left it there casually, as though he didn't care.
That's when I saw it. A notification popped up on his phone. The message was from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "Can't wait to see you again tonight. You're so hot, I can't stop thinking about you." At first I froze. My hand was midair, my wine glass forgotten. It was like the world slowed down as I stared at those words, trying to make sense of them. My first instinct was to laugh it off, some random girl trying to get his attention. But deep down I knew. I knew those words weren't innocent. They weren't just some friendly exchange. And in that moment, something inside me broke. He was lying.
He was lying to me, again. I felt my heart race.
My stomach churned. He had been texting someone else. And I had been the last to know. The realization hit me hard. My hands trembled as I picked up his phone. I wasn't even thinking anymore, just reacting. I couldn't stand not knowing the truth any longer. I unlocked it.
His messages, his history.
All there in black and white. I tried to keep it together as I scrolled, my mind reeling with the words that appeared before my eyes. One girl after another, dozens of messages. The more I scrolled, the more I realized he had been living a double life for months. He'd been playing me for a fool, all while pretending to be my loving fiancé. I scrolled back to the beginning. There. In a conversation with one girl, I saw something that made my blood boil. He was planning a future with her. He told her he wanted to move in with her, start a life together. "I'm in love with you," the message said. In love with her. The girl he had met 12 days ago, and then the kicker, I kept scrolling. The messages got worse, more sexual content. More promises. There were so many women, 27 to be exact, all kept in the dark, all believing they were the only one. And I had been right there beside him, trusting him, loving him. And he was telling them the same lies he told me. In that moment, I knew my life was never going to be the same. It wasn't just one betrayal. It was a dozen, it was everything. All of it, the lies, the gaslighting, the deceit. I had been living in a fantasy, while he had been living in a world of options. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. And that was the moment I knew. The first crack had been made. And it was deep. There was no going back now. When I tell you that the next month was the most confusing, soul-crushing time of my life, I'm not exaggerating. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the way he twisted everything. He didn't just lie to me, he made me believe I was the problem. He made me doubt myself, doubt my instincts, and worst of all, doubt the love I thought we shared. It all started the day after I discovered the messages. You'd think that the truth would have set me free, but no. The worst part wasn't the affair, it was the aftermath. It was the way he manipulated everything, made me question my own reality. And I let him. I was a mess, right? I had just uncovered everything I thought was true about our relationship was a lie, and my emotions were all over the place. I was devastated, I was angry. I was heartbroken. But mostly I was confused. I was left feeling like I didn't even know myself anymore. It is a special kind of pain when someone you love pulls the rug out from under you, and then tells you that you're the one who tripped. When I confronted him, I was shaking. I wanted to scream, to slap him, to make him feel the way I felt. But instead, I did what I always did in arguments. I tried to keep it together. I asked him about the messages. He didn't deny it. Instead, he played his first card. "You're being irrational. You're overreacting." Just like that. He turned the tables. "You never trust me. This is why we're falling apart, you know? You're always doubting me. You've been doing it for months." He looked at me like I was the crazy one. Me. The one who had just uncovered proof that he'd been lying to me for months. And like a fool, I listened. For a second, I even wondered if he was right. Maybe I was just paranoid. Maybe my past relationships had made me overly cautious. Maybe I had been the problem the whole time. Maybe my trust issues had caused him to cheat, not the fact that he was a cheater. Do you see it? That's how it starts. That's how the gaslighting works. It's like a slow, creeping fog that surrounds you, until you can't see clearly anymore. At first, it feels like just a small doubt in your mind. Maybe he's right, you think. But the more you listen to the doubt, the more you lose sight of what's real. It's a tactic used by manipulators to make you second-guess everything, including your own sanity. And it worked. For a while, I thought maybe I was crazy. Maybe I had been the one who pushed him to do this. I was so lost in the emotional hurricane that I couldn't think straight. It was only after weeks of his manipulation that I started to realize what was really going on. He wasn't just lying about the affair, he was trying to break me. He wanted me to feel like I was losing my mind. And for a while I did. Every time I tried to bring it up to talk about what he had done, he shut me down. "You're blowing things out of proportion," he'd say. Or worse, he'd make me feel guilty for even questioning him. "You're punishing me for something I haven't done in months." And somehow, in his twisted version of events, that made him the victim. I started to lose track of time. Days blurred together. I'd lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. My body felt like it was running on autopilot, eating, sleeping, working, but my mind, it was a war zone. I began doubting my own emotions, questioning everything he had ever told me. I became obsessed with figuring out what was real. Was he really cheating? Was I crazy for thinking he was? Was I imagining things? Every day the answers seemed more elusive. Then there were the little moments that ate away at me. He started acting like he didn't care about anything. He'd leave the house for hours without telling me where he was going. Sometimes he wouldn't even text me until late at night, and when he did, the messages were cold and detached. He'd say things like, "I've been busy," or "Sorry, I had stuff to take care of." But my gut kept telling me that something wasn't right. One night, I decided to confront him again. I had to know the truth. I was done with the lies. He looked at me with those calm eyes and said, "You just don't trust me." And honestly, that's a huge problem. He was so calm, so controlled that it made me feel like I was the one overreacting. "You don't get it," he said. "This is why things are falling apart. You're the reason I can't be happy. You're pushing me away with your constant need for validation. If you just trusted me, this would be fine." And I remember it hitting me in that moment. He wasn't sorry, not for cheating, not for lying. He was sorry I caught him.
He wasn't apologizing for the hurt he'd caused me.
He was just trying to shift the blame back onto me, and I believed him. For a while, I thought maybe I was the one who had made him feel unappreciated. Maybe I was making everything worse. But then the truth began to creep back in, slowly. I started to think about all the signs, the weird schedule changes, the sudden unexplained absences, the way he would glance at his phone when I walked by. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. He'd leave it unlocked, sitting there like he was daring me to look. And when I did, all I saw were more lies, more women. It was a vicious cycle. He'd gaslight me, I'd doubt myself. I'd fall back into the trap of thinking it was my fault. And every time I felt like I was starting to break free, he'd pull me back in. Like a puppet on a string. I'd end up apologizing like somehow I had caused the entire mess. But by then, I was already losing myself. The weight started to pile on. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I was constantly anxious. I would lay in bed, staring at the wall, listening to the sound of him breathing next to me, and I'd wonder how everything had gone so wrong. I lost 13 pounds during that month. 13 pounds in a month. My clothes didn't fit. My face was hollow. My eyes were red from crying so much. But through all of it, I still believed he would change. I still believed that if I just tried harder, if I just loved him more, he'd come back to me. That's the power of gaslighting. It makes you believe you are the problem, when in reality the problem is the person feeding you the lies. I was spiraling, but I couldn't stop. Because every time I tried to stand up for myself, I was met with his perfect calm. He never raised his voice. He never got defensive. He just made me feel like I was the crazy one. And somehow it worked. I had spent weeks trying to convince myself that maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed. But deep down, something kept gnawing at me, a persistent voice whispering, "You're not crazy." The gaslighting, the mood swings, the cryptic messages, it was all too much. It was too perfect. I knew I was missing something. I just didn't know what it was. Then came the moment that would change everything. It wasn't a grand moment or a dramatic confrontation. It was a simple thing, a moment that, in hindsight, I should have seen coming. It started with his iPad. We had been living in this suffocating, twisted version of normal for so long, each day dragging into the next. With him getting colder and more distant, while I kept sinking deeper into this pit of self-doubt. That night, he'd gone out with some friends, leaving me alone in the apartment. I wasn't supposed to snoop, but after everything that had happened, I couldn't help myself. I needed something to hold on to. I needed proof. I had spent so much time wondering about his phone, his ever-present attachment to it. He would take it everywhere, bathroom, car, bed, you name it.
He guarded it like it was his lifeline, but always under the guise of privacy and trust.
Yet, every time I reached for it, I got the same cold answer. "Why do you need to look at my phone?" That night, for the first time, he left his iPad on the coffee table. It was unusual. Normally, if he wasn't using it, it would disappear into his room. But tonight, it was just sitting there, silently taunting me. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't help myself. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. And there it was, the floodgate I'd been desperately searching for. The notification banner, sitting innocently at the top of the screen, was from a girl I didn't recognize. The message simply said, "Can't wait to see you again tonight. You're amazing. Just want you to know." That's when I felt it. That moment when everything inside you freezes. I couldn't breathe. I knew this wasn't just some random text. It wasn't a mistake. This was one of the dozens of girls I had been hearing about for weeks. But now there was no hiding behind the vague. It's nothing that he had always thrown at me. I wasn't imagining this. This wasn't just me being paranoid. The proof was right in front of me. I opened the messages. My heart was pounding as I scrolled. There they were, one after another, dozens of messages, many of them explicitly sexual, many with plans to meet up. Some were from women I'd never heard of, but others were familiar. Women I had seen him text, women I had been suspicious of. I scrolled further, not sure what I was hoping to find. But there it was, something that stopped me dead in my tracks. He had been telling these women the same lies he'd been telling me. He was telling them he loved them, telling them he couldn't wait to be with them, telling them that he was falling for them. But the one that caught my eye the most was a conversation with a girl who had only been in his life for 12 days. He had sent her a message that was almost identical to the ones he sent me at the beginning of our relationship. I want to build a life with you. I can't wait to see where this goes. You make me feel alive. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just cheating, this was replacing me. He was already emotionally investing in these other women, and I was just another pawn in his game. But what shocked me more than the infidelity, what made me sick to my core, was his message to her about moving in together. He'd told her that he was planning to leave me and run away with her. They would start fresh, build something together. I'm in love with you, he'd said, and she believed it. Just like I had, just like every other woman he'd been leading along. I felt the walls closing in. I thought I might suffocate right there. It was like everything in my world collapsed. But I couldn't stop myself. I kept scrolling, my fingers moving almost mechanically. And that's when I found the most damning evidence. The thing that would tie it all together. There were the photos. The sexually explicit photos. The ones I had never seen before. And then there were the conversations about setting up hookups. He had arranged meetups, sometimes the same night, sometimes the next day. A never-ending cycle of betrayal, lies, and manipulation. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of lies. Each conversation I read, each message I uncovered, twisted the knife deeper. He had been using me the entire time. Not just for companionship, but for a place to live, for emotional support, and worst of all, for a convenient, stable base to keep all of his other women. I felt sick. Not just because of the betrayal, but because I had given him everything. I had believed in him, in us, and he had been feeding me lies the entire time. And then it hit me. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was using me. I wasn't his partner, I was his cover. He had been playing me like an actor on a stage, setting up the perfect narrative while he secretly played a different role with all these women. But the worst part was yet to come. As I went through the messages, I found 27 names. 27 different women. And as I scrolled further, I realized that they weren't just casual flings. He was talking to them like he wanted to be with them. He had been telling some of them he loved them. Some he had even promised he would move in with them. I froze. My mind raced as I realized something even darker. I was just one of many. He had been living a double life for months, maybe even years. Every day he had been lying to me. Every night he had been going to sleep with me while texting someone else, while planning to leave me, while building something new with a different woman. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I couldn't keep playing this role of the dutiful girlfriend who didn't know any better. I couldn't allow myself to be the fool anymore. I wrote down every phone number, every woman, every lie. And when he came home later that night, acting like nothing had changed, like everything was normal, I knew what had to be done. I was done playing this game. I couldn't wait for the day he left. I had to act now. I knew what I had to do. The second the iPad slipped from my hands and I saw the full scale of the betrayal, I could feel my entire being shift. It wasn't just the cheating that broke me, it was the realization that I had been a fool, a complete fool. He had never loved me. I had been nothing more than a temporary cover, a convenient place for him to lay his head while he chased after whatever other life he thought he deserved. I had been played. And it wasn't just some petty betrayal, it was an elaborate, well-thought-out game. He had built his entire world around lies, and for so long I was trapped inside it. But I was done. I wasn't going to sit there crying and begging for answers anymore. No, this time I would take control. As I stared at the list of 27 women, their names, numbers, and the evidence of his lies practically burned into my memory, a dark thought began to form in my mind. A very clear, very precise plan. If he thought he could have it all, if he thought he could juggle women like they were nothing, then I would make sure everyone knew exactly who he was. I wasn't just going to let him leave quietly. I wasn't going to let him get away with this without facing the consequences. Not only was he destroying me, but he was tearing apart the lives of all these other women, using them as pawns in his twisted little game. I would make sure they all knew the truth. So, I did what anyone would do when faced with a man who had lied and used them for so long. I went full throttle. I contacted 2 of the women I had already spoken with. They had reached out to me through the T app, the app where women share information about toxic exes, cheaters, and manipulators. Turns out they had both been in similar situations with him. One of them was someone he had cheated on with me, and the other had been one of his former flings. They were both just as horrified by the extent of his lies as I was, and together we began to strategize. There was no more hesitation. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about taking back the power he had stolen from me. These women were on my side, and together we were going to make sure the world knew who he really was. We started drafting messages. Detailed, factual, and personal messages that would go out to every single one of his lovers, as I had come to call them. It wasn't just about sending a text or a screenshot of evidence. It was about giving them the full picture. About showing them how much he had manipulated and lied to each and every one of them. I had already taken the time to write down every single number, every conversation, every lie. I was armed with the truth, and I wasn't afraid to use it. But I didn't stop there. I knew I had to go further. I had to make sure everyone in his life knew exactly what he had been doing. So I began drafting messages to his friends and family. I was about to send them the exact same information I had gathered, letting them know the truth about their beloved, good guy. I knew the bridge would be burned. I knew the friendships would likely end. But at that point, I didn't care. The people who truly loved him would need to see who he really was. Maybe, just maybe, it would be the wake-up call he needed. Maybe someone would finally hold him accountable. The hardest part was actually sending those first few messages. The hesitation, the doubt that crept in. What if I'm overreacting? What if I'm the crazy one? But then I thought about everything he had put me through, the gaslighting, the manipulation, the lies. I thought about how I had lost weight, lost sleep, lost my confidence. I thought about the countless nights I had spent crying, wondering what I had done wrong, questioning my worth. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was finally standing up for myself. The first message I sent was to the girl who had been talking to him about moving in together. I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction when she replied, immediately telling me how relieved she was to know the truth. She had already made plans to meet up with him, but after reading what I had sent, she immediately canceled her flight. The weight that lifted off my shoulders in that moment was indescribable. I wasn't just exposing his lies. I was saving her from the same heartbreak I had experienced. The second woman I reached out to was just as grateful. She had been talking to him on and off for months, thinking they were building something real. I told her everything, about the texts, about the promises, about the other women. And like the first, she blocked him instantly. One by one, the dominoes started to fall. The women who had been kept in the dark were waking up to the truth. They were seeing him for who he really was. And for the first time, I felt like I had control over the situation. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one calling the shots. Then came the public part of my revenge. The part one had been planning for weeks but was too scared to pull the trigger on. I went public with everything. I started posting on TikTok, sharing the entire story well. Not everything, but enough to make sure people understood the kind of man he was. I posted some of the screenshots, detailing his lies, and I changed my Instagram bio to include a warning to the women who might not have received my messages yet. It wasn't just for his lovers, it was a warning for anyone who might ever meet him. The response was overwhelming. I had women from all over thanking me, sharing their own stories, telling me how much they appreciated the truth. Some of them even told me they had been in similar situations with him, and some were still in denial, refusing to believe the truth, but they would eventually. They'd all see the man for what he really was, and him? He stayed silent, not a single word. Not one apology, not even an angry text. He simply vanished. He unfollowed me on social media, untagged himself from every photo we had together, and stopped responding to the messages I had sent him. I knew that he had seen everything. His silence was a form of admission. It spoke volumes, but by then I had already moved on. I wasn't waiting for an apology or any sort of closure from him. I didn't need it. I had gotten my justice, not by revenge alone, but by freeing myself and helping the other women break free too. The second he moved out, the clock started ticking. The relief I felt was immediate, but I wasn't about to let my guard down. I had spent far too long under his shadow, and now it was time for the real work to begin. The plan had been months in the making, and the second he closed the door behind him, I knew I had to act. No more waiting. No more second-guessing. I had already collected everything, the screenshots, the phone numbers, the damning messages. I had scoured his devices, not just for the truth, but for the moment when everything started to unravel. I had taken notes, written down names, and gathered evidence of the web of lies he had woven. And now it was time to hit send. I was going to send the truth to the women he had manipulated. But I wasn't just sending a few angry texts. I was sending everything. Every message, every promise, every lie. The full story of how he had been sleeping with dozens of women, emotionally manipulating them, and telling them he loved them, all while he was pretending to be the man I thought I was going to marry. I was sending this to his friends and family too. Not because I wanted an apology, Lord knows I didn't need his validation, but because they deserved to know what their perfect little guy had been doing behind closed doors. Maybe, just maybe, someone in his circle would finally hold him accountable. Or maybe, just maybe, it would show them how truly manipulative he had been all along. The first message I sent was to the girl who had been talking to him about moving in together. She had almost fallen for his lines, thinking that he was someone worth investing in. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told her about the lies, the promises, and the truth about his emotional manipulation. I told her that he was already planning to leave me for her, only to realize he had been juggling dozens of other women. I didn't expect an immediate response, but I hoped it would be the wake-up call she needed. And I wasn't wrong. She blocked him within minutes of reading the message. Not only had I saved her from more heartbreak, but she was grateful. She reached out to me, thanked me, and we started talking. In that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. I had given her the truth, and, in doing so, I had given her the power to choose a different path. The next woman I contacted was someone who had been on his radar for months. She had no idea I even existed. She had been getting the same lies I had once believed, promises of a future together, whispers of love, sweet texts that made her feel special. But I knew the truth. I had lived it. I told her everything. I sent her the screenshots, the messages, the plans he'd made to meet her while still acting like we were happy. I told her that he was texting 20 other women while telling her she was the one. I told her how much I'd sacrificed for him, how deeply I'd believed in our future together. And when I sent the message, I felt a sick sense of satisfaction. She deserved to know the truth, just like I did. Her response was immediate. She was heartbroken, confused, and angry, but most of all, she was grateful. She thanked me for giving her the clarity she needed. She was already in the process of blocking him and would never look back. A small part of me felt guilty for the pain I knew I was causing her. But then I remembered something. He had caused me the same pain. I wasn't the one responsible for that pain.
He was. As I continued sending messages to the other women, the pattern started to emerge. They weren't angry with me.
They were angry with him. Many of them had been led to believe that he was something he wasn't, that he was committed, that he was trustworthy. They had been lied to. And I wasn't the only one who had been manipulated. We all had been. But it wasn't just the women who needed to know. The next phase of my plan was to make sure his friends and family knew exactly who he was. I had spent countless holidays with them, shared intimate moments, had deep conversations. They had seen me as part of the family. They had seen us as this perfect couple until the truth started coming out. I drafted a message to his mother first. I had met her several times during our relationship, and I had been genuinely fond of her. I wanted to believe she didn't know the kind of man her son was. But after everything I had uncovered, I couldn't hold on to that delusion any longer. She deserved to know how her son had been living his life. I sent her the full story, the lies, the women, the manipulation. I explained everything, just as I had done with the others. I didn't expect a response, but I had to give her the information. She needed to know who he really was before it was too late. I also sent a message to his brother and his closest friends, telling them how their perfect boy had been a monster behind closed doors. Again, I wasn't expecting apologies or explanations, but I needed them to understand that this wasn't something I could let slide. And, in a strange twist of fate, I started hearing from some of his friends. Not many, just a few, but I could tell they were shocked. They had no idea about the lies, the women, the whole other life he had been living. One of his closest friends even messaged me privately to apologize, saying that he'd had suspicions but never imagined it was this bad. He told me that he would try to talk to him, but that he wasn't sure it would make a difference. It didn't matter. What mattered was that someone who truly knew him finally saw through the act. But there was one more thing I had to do. I couldn't just leave it there. I needed to make sure that no other woman would ever fall for his lies. I knew the damage he had done, and I couldn't sit idly by hoping he would change. So I made the decision to go public. I posted everything on TikTok. I shared the story, the full, raw truth. I posted the screenshots, the messages, the lies. I changed the captions on all the photos we had together, using them as a warning to any woman who might ever meet him. The response was overwhelming. Messages of support flooded in, and women from all over started reaching out to me, telling me how they had been in similar situations with him. Some were still in denial, but I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. And then silence. He never responded to any of it, not a single word.
He didn't confront me. He didn't try to defend himself. He just disappeared, and you know what? That was enough.
His silence spoke louder than anything he could have said. He knew I had exposed him for who he really was, and now there was nothing left for him to hide behind. The truth was out there. And now I was free. The days after I hit send were a blur of emotions. A mixture of relief, satisfaction, and, if I'm being honest, a little bit of doubt. You see, once you go public with a story like mine, there's no going back. There's no taking it down, no deleting the posts. You're exposed. Your truth is out there for everyone to see, and once it's out there, it's forever. But I didn't care. I couldn't care. I had spent so much of my life in silence, tiptoeing around the truth, lying to myself about what was really happening. I had allowed him to pull the strings, making me feel like I was crazy, like I was overreacting. For too long, I had given him the power to shape the narrative. Now, it was time to take that power back. The TikTok videos I posted started to go viral almost immediately. At first, it was just a few comments, some supportive messages from strangers telling me how brave I was. But as the days went on, it snowballed. Women started reaching out, sharing their own stories about him. Some were angry, some were heartbroken, but all of them were thankful. They thanked me for exposing the truth, for helping them see through the lies they had been fed. One by one, women came forward. Some had been seeing him for months, some only for a few weeks. But the common thread was the same: he had lied to them.
He had promised them futures, told them he loved them, only to keep them in the dark while he juggled dozens of others.
He was a master manipulator, and it seemed like no one had been safe from his web of deceit. I wasn't the only one who had been played. And in some strange, twisted way that made me feel less alone. I wasn't the only woman he had broken. And now we were all standing together, united by the truth. We were reclaiming our power. We were taking control of our stories. The messages kept coming in, DMs, comments, texts. It was overwhelming, but in the best way possible. I had spent so long believing I was the only one, the only victim of his manipulative behavior. But now I saw that this was a pattern. He had done this to so many women, and I had the proof. I posted the screenshots, ones I had carefully saved from his phone. his iPad, from every device he used to manipulate and deceive me. I showed the world how he had lied to me, telling me he was loyal while sending sexual messages to other women. I showed them how he had promised a future to one woman while making the same promises to another. I laid it all out for everyone to see. And the responses were nothing short of overwhelming. One of his former friends reached out to me privately. He apologized for not seeing the signs earlier, for not being the friend he should have been. He said he had noticed some of the inconsistencies, the suspicious behavior, but had never imagined it was this bad. He promised me he would try to confront him, but I knew that wasn't my responsibility anymore. Another woman who had been on his radar for a while reached out to me, saying she was thankful that I had saved her from wasting any more time with him. She had been planning to visit him, to take things further, but after seeing the posts she immediately canceled her plans. She told me she had felt something was off but couldn't put her finger on it. Now she understood. Then there was his mother. The woman who had seen me as a daughter, who had welcomed me into their family, who had spoken with me about wedding plans just a few months earlier. I wasn't sure what I expected from her response. A part of me had hoped she'd understand, that she would apologize for not knowing, for not seeing who her son really was. But that's not what happened. She texted me back, very simply, "I don't know what's going on here, but this isn't the person I raised. He's my son, and I won't believe any of this until I talk to him myself." At first, I felt angry. I had just laid out a mountain of evidence and she was still defending him, but then I realized something. She was just as blinded by him as I had been. She had spent years seeing only the version of him he wanted her to see. And I had spent years doing the same. That's when it hit me. The truth wasn't just about exposing him. It was about exposing the lie we had all bought into. The lie that he was a good person, the lie that he was someone worth loving. We had all been living in his fantasy, in the world he had carefully crafted for himself, and it was time for that world to fall apart. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for all the women he had hurt. I was fighting for everyone who had believed in him, who had trusted him, who had been led to think they were special while he juggled them all. The more I exposed, the more I realized how much bigger the problem was. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about a system of lies, manipulation, and emotional abuse that had gone unnoticed for far too long. I posted one last video on TikTok. In it, I didn't focus on the anger or the betrayal. Instead, I focused on the strength I had found through this process. I talked about how I had been broken, how I had lost myself in the chaos of his lies, but how I had found a way to rebuild. I talked about the support I had received from the women who reached out to me. The ones who shared their own stories, the ones who had found their strength through my words. The response to that video was nothing short of incredible. Women from all walks of life shared their own experiences. Some of them were exes, some of them were just people who had been hurt by similar manipulative behavior. They thanked me for sharing my story, for giving them the courage to speak out, for letting them know they weren't alone. I realized in that moment that this wasn't just a story about revenge, it was a story about healing. About finding the strength to move on, to rise above the pain, and to walk away with your head held high. But it wasn't just the women who were reacting. His social media accounts started to blow up. His followers who had once idolized him started questioning everything. People who had known him for years were starting to wonder, was this really the person we thought we knew? His followers began unfollowing him. His friends started distancing themselves. His reputation, which he had carefully crafted over the years, was falling apart right before his eyes. And then, he did something that surprised me. He posted an apology not directly to me but to the public. He claimed that he had been going through a difficult time and that his actions were inexcusable. But it wasn't an apology for the pain he had caused. It wasn't an acknowledgement of the lies. It was just another attempt to cover his tracks. And this time, no one was buying it. He had made one fatal mistake. He underestimated the power of truth. And now the world knew. I had won. But the victory wasn't just in his public fall from grace. It was in the strength I had found within myself. In the way I had taken back my narrative and shared it with the world. I had burned down his fantasy, and in doing so, I had freed myself and so many others from the chains of his lies. In the days following the public burn, the silence was deafening. It wasn't the kind of silence I had expected, though. I thought it would be the quiet aftermath of a battle, where everything settles into place, and you can finally exhale. But instead, the silence was louder than anything I had ever heard. He didn't call, he didn't text. He didn't try to explain himself. For the first time in months, I was left without an apology, without a defense, and you know what? It spoke volumes. For a long time, I had waited for him to show some kind of emotion. I thought maybe he would come crawling back, begging for forgiveness, or at least attempt to manipulate me into thinking I was the one at fault. After all, that's how it had always gone before, right? He'd gaslight me, twist my reality, make me feel like I was the one who had broken us. I had been ready for that cycle to start again, expecting the familiar pain, the usual back and forth, where I was left questioning myself and my worth. But this time, there was none of that. Not even a hint. The first time I checked my phone after sending those final messages to his family and friends, I felt a strange combination of relief and frustration. There were no texts from him. No angry rants, no pleading apologies, nothing, just nothing. The silence was unsettling at first, but then, as the hours turned into days, I realized this was the exact thing I needed to move on.
He wasn't fighting back. He wasn't defending himself.
He wasn't even trying to justify his actions. Instead, he had gone completely radio silent. And in a strange way, that silence was an admission of guilt. He knew I was right. That realization sent a wave of power through me. He was no longer the man in control. He was no longer the one calling the shots. He had lost his ability to manipulate me. And by refusing to speak, by hiding away in his own guilt, he had sealed his fate. I never once reached out to him. I never sent that last message I kept thinking about. You know, the one where I would have tried to have the final word. The one where I would have demanded an apology, anything that would have made me feel like he had truly understood the hurt he had caused. But I never sent it because I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need closure from him. I had given myself that. I had built my own closure from the very second I sent the truth out into the world. And still, he said nothing. Days turned into weeks, and I began to feel the weight of the situation shift. I was moving forward while he was stuck in the past, living in the mess of his own actions. It was almost like I could see him in my mind, sitting alone in some corner, stewing in his regret, while I continued to build myself back up. I began working on me, truly working on myself for the first time in ages. I found strength in my own resolve, in the fact that I didn't need him or his validation. And then there were moments of clarity that kept me going, the messages from the women who thanked me. The women who had read my story and recognized their own pain in my words. They thanked me for opening their eyes to the truth, for freeing them from the lies. They were grateful for my strength, for my courage. I never realized how much my actions would echo through the lives of others, but hearing their stories, hearing how they too were finding their voices, made me feel like my fight had been worth it. His silence only made me more confident. The way he disappeared, the way he chose to stay hidden behind his pride, proved to me that he was a coward. He couldn't even face me. He couldn't even apologize. And honestly, that was all the confirmation I needed that I had done the right thing. He was weak. He was nothing compared to the strength I had found in myself. I wasn't going to waste another minute hoping for his apology. It wasn't coming. What surprised me most was that the silence was exactly what I needed to finally let go. When we were still together, the silence between us was suffocating. It was the kind of silence that comes with unspoken tension, with unresolved issues. It was the silence that made me second-guess myself, that made me feel like something was always off, but I could never quite put my finger on it. The silence had been heavy with doubt. It was the silence of someone who didn't care, who wasn't invested in you the way you thought they were. But now, the silence was freeing. It was the silence of someone who had no more control over me. The silence was my victory. It meant he couldn't manipulate me anymore. He couldn't gaslight me into believing I was wrong. The silence was my strength echoing back at him. It was the sound of me walking away, unapologetically, finally moving on. In the days that followed, I found myself rediscovering joy. It wasn't instant, of course not. It never is. But slowly I began to rebuild. I focused on the people who cared about me, the friends who had been there through all of this. I started taking care of myself in ways I hadn't before, physically, mentally, emotionally. I took long walks by myself, I picked up old hobbies I had let go of, and I began enjoying life again. I started dating myself, doing things for me. No longer waiting for validation from anyone else. No longer needing to be chosen or wanted by someone who was incapable of truly loving me. I was enough, just as I was, and that was the most powerful realization of all. And as the weeks passed, I saw less and less of his presence in my life. At first, I had wondered if he would ever try to reach out again. But he didn't, not once. He didn't even attempt to come back. It was as if I had become a shadow, someone he could no longer control, and the idea of seeing me, really seeing me, was something he just couldn't handle. That silence, that absence, was everything I needed to move forward. I was done waiting for him to say something. I was done hoping for his apology. I had already moved on. And by the time he realized the damage had been done, it was too late. I was already living my life better, stronger, and more fulfilled than ever before. The last time I thought about him, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing, just indifference. And that was the most beautiful part of all. At this point, I had already exposed the most damaging truths, seen the public fallout, and stepped away with a sense of power I hadn't felt in months. But what I had uncovered, what I had learned in the process, wasn't just about the lies he told me. There were deeper, darker layers to this entire situation, things I had only brushed against, but hadn't fully explored yet. There was more to the man I thought I knew. And the more I uncovered, the more I realized the depths of the deception. It wasn't just his infidelity that was destroying. It wasn't just the emotional manipulation. There were things he was doing behind closed doors that could have destroyed not only me but many others. And I wasn't just talking about the affairs or the countless lies. I had come across something more sinister. Something that, at first, didn't seem real. But the deeper I dug, the more it became clear. One night, while I was going through the remainder of his devices, I stumbled across a folder hidden deep in his files. At first, I thought it was just more photos or saved conversations. But as I opened it, I realized I had uncovered something much darker. Explicit content that wasn't tea just between him and me. There were videos that weren't meant to be shared. Videos of him with several of the women he had been seeing behind my back. And there was more images, clips, and interactions that weren't just inappropriate, but borderline illegal. It wasn't just betrayal at its worst, it was manipulation at an entirely different level. What sent a chill through my spine wasn't tea, just what I was seeing. It was the realization of how many women were involved in this. These weren't just casual one-night stands or flings. These were planned encounters, some of which involved the exchange of explicit videos and private, intimate moments. I could feel my stomach turn as I scrolled through more and more. It wasn't the fact that he had been filming these women. He had manipulated them into doing things for him, behind the guise of intimacy, and in some cases he had convinced them to give him explicit content they thought was private. This wasn't just cheating, it was exploitation. And what's worse, there were several conversations between him and another woman about starting an OnlyFans account together, a collaboration where they would share sexual content. As if it was just another business deal to him, a way to capitalize on his deceitful lifestyle. What I realized then was terrifying. He wasn't just creating a facade of a loving boyfriend to deceive me. He had been orchestrating a network of deception, and in his mind everyone was expendable. The women he had been manipulating weren't just collateral damage. They were pawns in a much larger game that revolved around money, control, and an insatiable need for power. This wasn't a simple affair. This was a calculated exploitation of vulnerable women. Each one playing into his hands while he made sure they believed they were the only one. What was more disturbing was the way he treated these women, how he convinced them to trust him, how he made them feel special, while simultaneously dehumanizing them for his own gain. He wasn't just playing with their hearts. He was playing with their lives. I spent the next few nights reflecting on what I had found. The deepening horror of it all started to hit me. This wasn't just a relationship gone wrong. This was a predatory man who had been manipulating people for years, using charm and lies to keep everyone under his control. It wasn't just about the affairs. It wasn't just about the lies. It was about the way he used those around him to fulfill his own needs, never caring about the collateral damage. At the same time, a nagging thought kept creeping into my mind. How many other women were involved in this web? How many had been exploited without even realizing it? How many were still out there, believing the lie that they were the special one, the one who would finally make him settle down, while he was moving on to the next? It felt like a slow burn inside me, knowing I had already exposed him to the people who mattered most: the women, his family, his friends. But now there was something even deeper that needed to be addressed. It wasn't just the truth that had to come out, it was the danger that he posed to others. And there was more. There were his plans to create and profit from his sexual exploits. These weren't just fleeting fantasies he had, they were calculated moves. The OnlyFans account wasn't some casual thought. He was actively plotting how to make this his next career move. A career built on lies, deception, and the exploitation of the women he had manipulated. My focus shifted. It wasn't just about my personal revenge anymore. It wasn't about getting closure from a man who had no intention of giving it to me. Now, it was about making sure he couldn't do this to anyone else. I had already reached out to a few of the women who were still in the dark, but it wasn't enough. I needed to make sure others knew about what had happened, not just the women he had already hurt, but anyone who could fall victim to his charm and lies in the future. I knew this was bigger than just me. This wasn't just about my heart being broken or my time wasted. This was about stopping a predator from continuing his destructive behavior. The truth was, he wasn't just a bad boyfriend. He wasn't just a liar. He was a manipulator, a user, a man who had been exploiting women for his own gain, and that was something that couldn't go unnoticed. The truth had to be told. The story had to be spread. This wasn't just about protecting my own heart anymore. It was about making sure his next victim didn't fall for his lies the way I did. As the weeks passed, I found myself stepping further away from the wreckage he had left behind. At first, it felt impossible to believe I could actually move on. But with every passing day, the weight on my chest seemed a little lighter. I had faced the worst of it, the betrayal, the lies, the exploitation, and I had stood tall through it all. But there was something about this kind of victory that felt bittersweet. It was as if I had crossed the finish line only to realize that the race itself had been a trap from the beginning. Yes, I had won, I had exposed him, taken control of my story, and freed myself from his grasp. But I couldn't ignore the fact that this entire ordeal had left a scar on my soul. The bitterness wasn't just in the loss of a relationship. It was in the loss of trust, the erosion of my belief that love was supposed to be a safe place. The truth is, I couldn't just celebrate the victory without acknowledging the pain that had brought me here. For so long, I had been living in a fog, believing the lies, convincing myself that I was part of something real. I had given him my time, my energy, my trust, and for what? To have it all stolen away in one cruel revelation after another. But the thing that made this victory bittersweet wasn't the lies themselves. It wasn't even the betrayal, though that had certainly hurt. What made it bittersweet was realizing that, even though I had uncovered the truth, there were still so many unanswered questions. There were still so many parts of the story I would never understand. And while I had removed the mask, there was no way to unsee the monster underneath. I couldn't go back and change anything. The time I spent with him, the laughs, the kisses, the plans we had made were now tinged with the knowledge of how much I had been deceived. I couldn't erase the feeling of being used, of being a pawn in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. He wasn't just a bad boyfriend, he was a predator. He had systematically broken down my sense of self, made me question my worth, and gaslighted me into believing I was the problem. I'd been in love with an idea, the idea of a future we were supposed to build together. The idea that he was the one. But what I had really been in love with was the version of him he had created for me. He had built the perfect man for me in my mind, someone who cared, someone who wanted the same things I wanted, someone who would protect and cherish me. That man never existed. And realizing that hurt in a way I hadn't prepared for. But here's the thing about healing. It's messy. It's uncomfortable, and it's rarely linear. Some days I woke up and felt like a warrior, like I had conquered the world. Other days, the weight of the loss came crashing down, and I felt like I was drowning in my own grief. I had to learn to accept both sides of this process. I couldn't just bury the pain and focus only on the victory. To truly heal, I had to confront the wounds he had left behind and let myself grieve. It wasn't just the loss of him as a person. It was the loss of my own sense of security, the loss of trust in something I thought was real. It was the fact that I had to reframe the entire relationship, knowing now that everything had been built on a lie. It wasn't easy to swallow. And the more I processed it, the more I realized that no matter how much I exposed him, no matter how many women I helped to see the truth, the pain of betrayal still stung. But that's where the victory came in. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need his acknowledgement. He had already taken everything from me, my trust, my peace, my sense of security. But I still had something he couldn't take, my strength. I had taken control of my narrative. I had chosen not to be the victim anymore, and yes, it was bitter. But there was sweetness in that bitterness too. There were moments when I looked back at everything, at all the lies, all the manipulation, and wondered what I could have done differently. What if I had seen the red flags sooner? What if I hadn't ignored my gut feeling that something was wrong? But the truth is, I did the best I could with the information I had at the time. And if anything, this experience had shown me just how resilient I truly was. I had endured the worst, and here I was, standing tall. He couldn't break me anymore. What he hadn't realized was that by taking everything, my trust, my love, my time, he had given me the ultimate gift. He had forced me to find my own strength, to rebuild who I was from the ground up. And while it wasn't the life I had expected, it was mine. I owned it. As time went on, I found myself surrounded by love again. Not from the people I had once thought were my closest allies, but from the friends who had been there from the start. The people who loved me for who I truly was, not the version of me I had been hiding behind. They helped me heal, helped me rebuild the parts of myself that he had torn down. I learned to trust again, to let myself be vulnerable, but this time on my terms. And with every step forward, the past faded a little more. The man who had hurt me so deeply was no longer a central part of my life. His silence, his refusal to acknowledge what he had done, had sealed his fate. I was moving forward without him, and it felt like freedom, but I would never forget what I had learned. I would never forget the lessons this entire experience had taught me. About love, about trust, about myself. And, above all, I would never forget that I had faced the worst of it and come out on the other side stronger. Victory wasn't just about the exposure, the fallout, or the public shaming. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about the quiet moments, the moments where I sat with my own thoughts and realized that I had taken back my power. Subscribe for more real-life stories that prove karma doesn't just wait sometimes, it texts back.